The air was dry and heavy, carrying the smell of burnt metal and old blood. The mining moon had been silent for days. No movement except the wind that pushed clouds of dust across the broken ground. Sergeant Cole walked slowly through the ruins. His rifle ready, his boots crunching on shattered stone. The sun was pale and weak here, throwing long shadows that made the wrecked buildings look like sleeping beasts. His squad moved behind him, checking every corner, every broken wall. They had been sent to search for survivors after the last battle. The human command didn't expect to find much, only corpses, debris, maybe some damaged weapons. But Cole had learned long ago that the battlefield sometimes hid things that could change the war. He scanned the collapsed mining station ahead and caught something, a flicker of movement in the corner of his eye. It was small, quick, almost too fast to notice. He raised his hand, signaling his squad to stop. The dust swirled between the jagged walls, and for a moment, nothing happened. Then he saw her. A figure no taller than his chest, wearing cracked black armor that had once shone with a proud warrior's mark. The mark was scratched out now. Her breathing was ragged. Each inhale sounding like it hurt. She clutched a short blade in her hand, though her arms trembled too much to lift it fully. Cole stepped forward slowly, his voice low and calm. "It's all right," he said, even though he knew she probably didn't understand the words. Her eyes, sharp and bright like molten gold, followed his every move. She didn't speak. But she didn't run either. That was strange. Her kind, the Vreth, were known for fighting until death rather than surrendering. Yet here she was, standing still, her knees bent slightly, like she was ready to collapse. One of Cole's men muttered, "She's just a kid," but Cole wasn't sure. The Vreth aged differently, and even the smallest ones were trained to kill from the time they could walk. Still, something about her posture didn't scream warrior anymore. It screamed cornered animal. He took one more step forward, lowering his weapon. The dust stung his eyes. But he could see her more clearly now. A crack ran along her helmet. Blood darkened one side of her face. Her armor plates hung loose, as if they'd been stripped from someone else and forced on her. Her grip on the blade was weak. Cole slowly reached out a hand. Not to grab her, but to let her see it. She flinched just slightly, as if the idea of a human's touch was more terrifying than the battlefield around her. Her jaw tightened, but she didn't raise her blade. Cole closed the last step between them and placed his hand gently on her shoulder, expecting her to either strike or pull away. Instead, she shook. Her whole body trembled under his palm, like she'd been holding herself rigid for too long and finally let go. The sound she made was not a growl, not a cry, but something in between, the sound of someone who didn't know whether to fear or hope. The squad watched in silence. None of them had seen this before. Enemy soldiers didn't freeze like this, and they certainly didn't let a human touch them without a fight. But Cole didn't push her. He kept his hand there, steady and calm. Feeling her unsteady breaths, "Easy," he murmured. She didn't move. Her blade slipped from her fingers and fell into the dust with a soft thud. It was a small sound, but to Cole it felt louder than gunfire. That was the moment he knew. Whatever had happened to her before this day had already broken something inside her. She swayed on her feet, and Cole caught her before she could fall. Her body was lighter than he expected, almost too light, like she hadn't eaten in days. Her armor clinked weakly against his own gear as he lifted her. She made no attempt to fight him. No curse, no strike, just silence. "Bag her up, Sarge," one of the soldiers asked, holding out a restraint collar. Cole glanced at it, then back at her. She was staring up at him now, her eyes wide, filled with something that didn't belong on a battlefield. Confusion, maybe even disbelief. Cole shook his head. "No collar," he said. His squad exchanged confused looks but didn't argue as they moved back toward the transport. The wind picked up. Carrying the smell of burning fuel from the distant wreckage, Cole held her steady, each step stirring up more dust. The moon was quiet again, but he couldn't shake the feeling that this moment, this strange, fragile truce between a human soldier and a tiny alien warrior, was going to change everything. When they reached the shuttle, he set her down gently in one of the seats. She sat there without speaking, her small frame almost swallowed by the bulky human restraints. Cole buckled her in without forcing her, and for a brief moment her hand brushed against his. Her fingers were cold. Shaking slightly, he didn't know why. But that tiny touch made something twist in his chest. He had seen enemies beg, curse, spit, and fight to the last breath, but never this. Never an enemy who shook, not from fear of death, but from the touch of kindness. As the shuttle lifted off, Cole kept glancing at her. She didn't look away from him, just kept her golden eyes locked on his face like she was trying to understand something impossible. The dust-covered moon shrank beneath them. But Cole had a feeling that whatever story had begun here in the ruins was far from over. This wasn't just a rescue or a capture. It was the start of something neither of them could have predicted. The shuttle's engines hummed softly as it cut through the thin sky. Inside, the smell of dust and burnt metal still clung to the air. The tiny alien warrior sat in the far corner of the seat, her knees drawn up, her arms wrapped tightly around them. She stared at the floor, unmoving, as if trying to make herself invisible. Sergeant Cole sat across from her, helmet resting on his lap. He studied her carefully, trying to read the strange mix of tension and exhaustion in her posture. She hadn't spoken a single word since they lifted off. Not even when one of the soldiers offered her a drink. She just shook her head and curled in tighter. The rest of the squad whispered among themselves. Their voices were low, but the alien's sharp ears twitched at every sound. Some called her dangerous, others called her broken. Cole said nothing, but inside his mind, questions kept spinning. Why hadn't she fought? Why did she tremble when he touched her? And most of all, what had made her look at him like that? The shuttle hit a pocket of turbulence, jolting everyone slightly. The alien's eyes flicked up for just a moment, golden irises catching the dim light. She scanned the cabin quickly before returning to her curled position. Cole noticed the way her fingers tightened on her knees with every bump, as if she was bracing for a blow that never came. When the pilot's voice crackled over the comm, announcing their arrival at base in 15 minutes, Cole leaned forward. His voice was calm, slow. "You'll be safe here," he said. Not sure if she understood, she didn't reply. Didn't even glance at him, but her shoulders shifted slightly, almost like she was listening. The shuttle landed with a soft thud on the reinforced platform of Outpost Kilo 7. The hatch hissed open, letting in the cold night air. The alien hesitated. Before unbuckling, her movements were slow. Unsure, Cole stepped out first, motioning for her to follow. For a long second, she stayed frozen. Then, with a barely audible breath, she slid out of her seat and stepped onto the platform. Soldiers moving about the landing area paused to stare. It wasn't every day they saw one of the feared Vreth warriors walking calmly beside a human, especially one so small. Her armor looked oversized now, its cracked plates hanging awkwardly from her thin frame. Cole noticed the way she glanced at the staring humans, not with pride or defiance, but with the wary look of someone used to being surrounded by enemies inside. The outpost, bright overhead lights cast harsh shadows. The alien flinched at the sudden brightness, her eyes narrowing as she tried to adjust. The sound of boots on metal floors echoed down the narrow corridors. Each noise made her shoulders twitch slightly. But she stayed close behind Cole. He led her to a small room near the medical wing. The walls were plain, the furniture minimal, just a bed, a table, and a chair bolted to the floor. There was no lock on the inside, but there was one on the outside. Cole didn't engage it. He gestured to the bed. "You can rest," he said. Still unsure if she understood, she stood in the doorway for several seconds, eyes scanning every corner of the room like she was checking for traps. Finally, she stepped inside. Her fingers brushed over the bed frame. Then over the folded blanket lying on it. She didn't sit. Just kept looking around as if this simple space was stranger than any battlefield. Cole placed a tray on the table. A small bowl of warm stew and a slice of bread, steam curled into the air, carrying the scent of herbs and slow-cooked meat. The alien's gaze locked on the food, her body tensing. Cole stepped back to give her space. After a long moment, she approached the table. Her hands hovered over the bowl. But she didn't touch it. Instead, she looked at him. Her voice so quiet, it was almost lost in the hum of the air vents. "Food is not free," she said. The words stopped him cold. They were the first she had spoken to him. Her tone was not hostile. It was careful, wary, almost rehearsed, as if she had been forced to say it many times before. Cole shook his head slowly. "It's free," he said firmly. "No trade, no cost." She stared at him for a moment longer, then slowly lowered herself into the chair. Her fingers curled around the bowl, and for a second he thought she would eat, but then she set it down again and pushed it slightly away. Her expression didn't change. But something in her eyes told him she wasn't refusing the food itself. She was refusing the risk that came with accepting it. Cole didn't press her. Instead, he sat in the other chair and took a slow sip from his own cup. He talked softly about simple things, the weather on the mining moon, the sound of wind through the ruins, the cold air at night. She didn't answer, but she kept glancing at him between each sentence, as if trying to figure out why he was still speaking to her without demanding something in return. Eventually, he stood and moved toward the door, pausing with his hand on the frame. "You're safe here," he repeated. Then he left the room without locking it. As the door clicked shut behind him, the alien sat alone, her golden eyes fixed on the untouched stew. She didn't eat, but her hand rested lightly on the edge of the bowl, as if testing whether it would be taken away. The hum of the outpost filled the silence, and somewhere deep inside, a small part of her began to wonder if maybe, just maybe, the human's words were true. The next morning, the outpost was quiet, except for the distant hum of generators. Sergeant Cole stepped into the small room where the alien warrior had spent the night. She was awake, sitting on the edge of the bed, her back straight, her eyes watching the door before he even entered. The bowl of stew from last night still sat on the table, untouched. The bread had gone hard at the edges. Cole noticed the way she looked at it, not with hunger, but with a kind of guarded suspicion, like the food itself was part of a trap. "Didn't eat?" Cole asked softly. She didn't answer. Her golden eyes moved from his face to the floor. Cole walked over, picked up the tray, and set it aside. "All right," he said. Maybe later. He left for a moment and returned with a new plate. A fresh piece of bread, still warm, and a small cup of water. He placed it on the table. Stepping back so she wouldn't feel crowded, she glanced at it, then at him. Her voice was soft but firm. "Food is not free," she repeated. Cole pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. "It's free here," he said. "You don't have to give anything for it." She tilted her head slightly, as if trying to understand. "Always a price," she said. The words carried weight, as if they came from years of hard lessons. Cole leaned forward. "Not from me," he told her. She looked away, her fingers curling into her palms. After a long silence, she reached for the bread. But instead of eating, she broke off a small piece and held it in her hand like she was testing its reality. She brought it close to her mouth, hesitated, then placed it back on the plate. He could see her struggling, not with the food itself, but with the idea of taking it. "What was your name again?" Cole asked gently. She hesitated before answering. "Oreshka." The name was short, sharp, and carried a kind of strength, even when spoken softly. Oreshka, Cole repeated. That's a good name. She looked at him for a moment, her expression unreadable. Names mean nothing if you are nothing, she said quietly. Cole frowned. You're not nothing, he told her. But she didn't respond. Outside the room, voices echoed faintly through the corridor. Other soldiers. Moving. Talking, laughing. Cole saw the way her shoulders tensed at every loud sound. Like she was preparing for trouble. It was the same kind of tension he'd seen in soldiers who had lived too long in enemy territory. Cole decided to try something different. He took the bread from the plate, broke it in half, and took a slow bite, chewing calmly. Then he placed the other half back on the plate and pushed it toward her. See? No tricks, he said. Oreshka watched him for several long seconds. Her eyes darted between his face and the bread. Finally, she picked it up. Her fingers trembled slightly. But this time, she didn't put it down. She took the smallest bite possible. Chewed slowly, swallowed, and then set the rest back on the plate. Cole smiled faintly. That's a start, he said. She didn't smile back, but she didn't push the food away either. It felt like progress, however small. Later that day, Cole returned to check on her. The bread was gone, and the empty cup sat neatly on the table. Oreshka was sitting by the window, staring out at the cold expanse of the outpost yard. Soldiers were walking across it, some carrying crates, others heading toward the training yard. Her gaze followed them like she was studying their movements. You're a warrior, aren't you? Cole asked. She didn't look at him. I was, she said. Now I am. Something else. Her tone was calm, but there was something underneath, a quiet grief. Cole didn't press her, but the answer stayed in his mind. That evening, when Cole brought another meal, simple stew and water. She didn't refuse it outright. She took the tray, placed it on the table, and sat down. But before eating, she looked at him. Why? She asked. Why what? He replied, why give me food? She said, why no price? Cole thought for a moment. Because you need it, he answered simply. Because you're here now, and here. We take care of the ones beside us. She studied his face like she was trying to find the hidden catch in his words. When she found none, she took a small spoonful of stew and ate. Slowly, carefully, like every bite might still be a test. Cole didn't say anything else. He just sat across from her, letting her eat at her own pace, and though she only finished half the bowl, she didn't push it away this time. When he stood to leave, she spoke again. Cole, she said. He paused at the door. Surprised, she had remembered his name. Thank you, she said. Her voice was still soft. But this time, it didn't sound rehearsed. It sounded real. Cole left the room with a strange feeling in his chest, a mix of relief and something else he couldn't name. It wasn't victory. It wasn't even trust yet. But it was a beginning, and he knew beginnings could change everything. The days passed slowly in Outpost Kilo 7, the cold air outside bit at the skin. But inside the walls, it was warm, quiet, and steady. Oreshka stayed mostly in her room, still moving like someone who expected danger at every turn. Yet something in her had shifted since that first piece of bread. Cole noticed it the most in the small moments in the morning. She no longer sat with her arms wrapped tightly around herself. She sat straighter, her eyes less sharp, less ready to strike when he entered the room. She didn't flinch anymore. Her gaze met his, cautious, but steady. One afternoon, he found her standing by the window again, watching the soldiers in the yard. They were running drills, lifting crates, sparring, calling out orders. Oreshka's eyes followed every movement. Cole stepped beside her. You miss it? He asked. She tilted her head slightly. War. She said, no. She paused for a moment. I miss knowing what I am. Her words stayed with him. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into his pocket and took out something. Small, a folded cloth, dark blue with a faint silver stitching at the edges. "What is this?" I asked as he held it out to her, a scarf. He said, "It's nothing special, but it's warm." She took it slowly, as if expecting. It too vanished in her hands. Her fingers ran over the fabric, tracing the stitching. She didn't put it on, just kept holding it. "Why?" She asked again. "Why give me this?" Cole shrugged lightly. "Because you look cold." That was the moment. He saw it in her eyes, the first crack in the wall she kept between them. It wasn't trust yet, but it was something close. Later. That day, she surprised him when he brought her the evening meal. She didn't wait for him to set it down. She stood and took it from his hands. Her fingers brushed his briefly, and though she still trembled, she didn't pull away. "Thank you," she said quietly. Then she sat and began to eat without hesitation. Cole didn't comment on it. He knew better than to point out the change. Sometimes trust was like a shy animal. Move too fast, and it would run. That night, he returned to check on her again before lights out. The scarf was draped loosely around her neck now, and though she tried to act like it meant nothing, he noticed the way her hand kept brushing over it, like she wanted to be sure it was still there. "Do you have family?" Cole asked suddenly. Her eyes froze on his face for a moment, then she looked away. "Not anymore," she said. The words were flat, but there was a faint tremor beneath them. "Lost?" Cole asked gently. She gave the smallest nod. "Lost?" She repeated. He wanted to ask more, but he didn't. Some truths were too heavy to pull into the open all at once. Instead, he said, "You have people here now." She looked at him, almost like she wanted to believe it, but her silence was answer enough the next morning. Cole passed by her room and found the door slightly open. Inside, Arashka was kneeling on the floor, examining a small wooden training. Figure one of the soldiers must have left behind. It was a crude carving of a human soldier holding a shield. She turned it in her hands, studying the shape of the armor and the lines of the face. When she noticed him, she didn't drop it or hide it. Instead, she held it up. "You fight like this?" she asked. Cole stepped inside. "Sometimes," he said. "Mostly, we fight with what we have." She studied him for a long moment, then set the figure on the table. "Reth, fight with honor." She said, "Humans fight with something else? What do we fight with?" Cole asked, curious. She hesitated, then answered, "Heart." The word sounded strange in her voice, as if it was not a word her people used often that night. As Cole was making his rounds, he passed the common area and saw something unexpected, Areshka sitting in a chair near the fireplace. A cup of water in her hands, two human soldiers sat across from her, speaking quietly. She wasn't talking much, but she was listening, really listening. Her eyes moved between them, and every now and then she gave a small nod. Cole didn't interrupt. He just watched for a moment before moving on. Something told him that the walls around her heart were coming down brick by brick. When he returned later, she was back in her room, sitting on the bed. The scarf was still around her neck, and the small wooden soldier was on the table beside her. "You stayed out there a long time," Cole said. She glanced at him. It was not bad, she admitted. The words were simple, but for her, they carried weight. Cole smiled faintly. "That's good," he said. And though she didn't return the smile, there was something softer in her gaze than when they had first met. Something that told him the tiny alien warrior was beginning to see him not as an enemy, but as something else entirely. The night was quiet in Outpost Kilo 7. The low hum of the generators filled the halls like a steady heartbeat. Outside, the wind swept across the frozen ground, rattling loose panels and sending small clouds of dust into the air. Cole had just finished his last patrol when a sound stopped him in the corridor. It was faint at first, a muffled voice, almost like someone talking in their sleep. He followed it, the sound growing sharper with each step. It came from Areshka's room. He pushed the door open slightly and saw her, curled on the bed, her hands gripping the blanket tight. Her body shook and her voice trembled in a language he didn't understand. Cole stepped inside quietly. "Areshka," he said softly. She didn't wake. Her breathing was fast. Too fast, and her voice broke mid-sentence, as if she was pleading with someone. He reached out and touched her shoulder gently. Her eyes snapped. Open instantly, golden and wild. She pushed herself back against the wall. Her breath ragged. "It's me," Cole said quickly, keeping his voice calm. She stared at him for a long moment before her gaze softened. The tension in her shoulders eased, but her hands were still trembling. "You were dreaming," he said. She shook her head slowly. "Not dream," she whispered. "Memory?" The word carried a weight that made him stay silent, waiting for her to go on. For a moment, she looked like she might say nothing. Then she took a slow breath. "Before you found me. There was a place," she began. Her voice was flat, as if she had learned to tell this story without letting it break her. "Wraith do not take prisoners. Not usually, but some. They keep their own kind when they are no longer useful." In battle, Cole frowned. "Your own people?" She nodded. "If you are too small, too weak, too slow, you are not a warrior. You are a tool. Tools do not eat unless they work. Tools do not speak unless told. And tools can be sold." Her eyes went distant for a moment, and Cole knew she was seeing it all again. She told him how she had been captured by a rival Wraith clan after a failed skirmish. Too injured to fight, she was kept in a dark hold with others, traded between ships like spare parts, fed only when she completed the tasks they gave her, carrying heavy loads, cleaning blood from the decks, running messages for commanders. She failed. There was no food, sometimes no water. "That's why you said food isn't free," Cole said quietly. She looked at him sharply, as if surprised he understood. "Food is always a price," she said again, but softer this time. "Sometimes the price is work. Sometimes pain." Cole felt a tightness in his chest. He had seen cruelty in war before, but hearing it from her like this, in that quiet, steady voice, made it real in a way no report or briefing could. "No one here will hurt you for eating," he said firmly. "No one." She didn't answer, but she didn't look away from him either. For a while, they sat in silence. The only sound was the faint whistle of wind outside. Then she spoke again. "When you touched me in the dust," she said slowly, "I thought it was the start of another price, but it was not. I did not know what to do." Her eyes flickered briefly to his hand, as if remembering that moment. It was strange. Cole nodded. "I didn't take you to use you. I took you because leaving you there would have been wrong." She tilted her head slightly. "Humans. Strange," she murmured. It wasn't an insult, just an observation. Over the next few days, Cole noticed small changes in her. She began leaving her room during the day, walking short distances down the hall. Sometimes sitting in the corner of the mess hall with her cup of water. She still kept her distance from most of the soldiers, but she no longer froze when they passed by. One evening, she surprised him again. He found her in the training yard, standing near the wooden dummies the soldiers used for sparring. She picked up a practice blade, much too large for her, and tested its weight. Cole stepped up beside her. "You planning to join the drills?" he asked. She glanced at him, then gave a small shrug. "Maybe." She moved awkwardly at first, the blade heavy in her grip. But then something shifted. Her stance tightened. Her movements became faster, more precise. Cole realized he was watching the warrior in her re-emerge, the part that had been buried under fear. After a few minutes, she lowered the blade, breathing hard. "Still weak," she said. But there was no bitterness in her voice. Only fact. Cole handed her a smaller blade. "Start with this," he said. She took it, and this time she didn't shake, when their hands touched that night. As she wrapped the scarf around her neck before bed, Cole caught a look in her eyes he hadn't seen before. Not fear, not mistrust, but something closer to determination. Whatever shadows from her past still haunted her, she was starting to step out from under them. And Cole knew that meant something important the next time someone tried to take her. She wouldn't be the same trembling figure he had found. In the dust, the mess hall was alive with noise. Soldiers clattered their trays. Voices bounced off the metal walls, and the smell of hot stew filled the air. Cole sat at a corner table, his back to the wall, watching the room out of habit across. From him, Areshka sat quietly, her small frame almost hidden by the oversized chair. She ate slowly, carefully, the same way she always did, small bites, long pauses, as if every meal was something to study rather than enjoy. Most of the soldiers had grown used to her presence. They still looked sometimes curious about the tiny alien warrior who now walked the halls without chains. But not everyone accepted her. A group of 3 soldiers sat 2 tables over. Laughing loudly, Cole didn't pay them much attention until he caught a word: pet. The word was followed by another laugh, sharper this time. He didn't have to look to know they were talking about her. One of them, a tall man with a scar down his cheek, leaned back in his chair and spoke louder. "Hey Sarge, your alien pet learning tricks yet? Does she roll over for bread?" His friends laughed. Areshka froze. Her spoon hung in midair. Her golden eyes locked on the scarred man. Cole's jaw tightened. He started to stand. But Areshka's voice cut through the noise first. It wasn't loud, but it was sharp enough to stop nearby conversations. "I am not a pet," she said. Her words carried an edge of steel. The scarred man grinned, clearly enjoying himself. "Looks like she talks now," he said. "Careful, might bite." His friends chuckled again. Cole was about to step in when Areshka rose from her chair. She moved around the table and stopped right in front of the man. She had to tilt her head back to look at him. But there was nothing small about her stance. Her hands were at her sides, but her shoulders were squared. "He is my commander," she said clearly. "My protector. Insult him again, and I will." Answer: the mess hall went quiet. Every soldier nearby stopped eating. Waiting to see what would happen, the man looked down at her. Amused answer: "How? With that tiny knife you carry?" Areshka didn't flinch. "With what I have," she said simply. Her voice wasn't loud, but it was steady. Cole could see the faint tremor in her hands, but she didn't back away. The man's smile faded slightly. He leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "You think you can scare me, little warrior?" She tilted her head just slightly. "Not scare," she said. "Remind. You know my kind. Vreth, do not warn twice." Something in her tone made him pause. Then, with a snort, he sat back, muttering something under his breath. The tension in the room broke, and the soldiers around them went back to eating, but not without a few curious glances in her direction. Areshka turned and walked back to her seat. She sat down, picked up her spoon, and continued eating as if nothing had happened. Cole watched her for a moment before speaking. "You didn't have to do that," Shay said quietly. She looked at him. "I did." She replied simply, "They spoke against you." Cole wasn't sure what to say. He'd spent years leading soldiers into battles, earning respect through orders and survival. But here was someone who had once been a prisoner, standing up for him in a room full of people who doubted her. And she hadn't done it to earn favor. She'd done it because she believed it was right. That night, Cole passed her room on his rounds. The door was slightly open. Inside, she sat at the table, the small wooden soldier beside her, the scarf still wrapped around her neck. She was sharpening the edge of a small blade, not for use against enemies in the outpost, but because, as she had once told him, a warrior's tools must always be ready. When she noticed him at the door, she set the blade down. "You are angry?" she asked. Cole shook his head. No, he said, I'm proud. She tilted her head at the word, as if turning it over in her mind. Proud, she repeated softly, then she nodded once. Good. For the first time since they met, she smiled. Not wide, not for long, but real. It was small and fleeting, but it was enough to tell Cole that the wall between them was no longer just cracked. It was breaking apart from that day forward. The soldiers in the mess hall never called her pet. Again, they still watched her with curiosity, but there was a new tone in their glances. Not mockery, but respect, and Cole knew it wasn't because of him. It was because Areshka had earned it herself. The orders came early in the morning. The cold light of dawn had barely touched the outpost when Cole was called into the command room. The message was short. Areshka was to be transferred to another unit, far from Kilo 7. The official reason was security, but Cole knew. What it really meant, someone higher up didn't want a Vreth warrior. Even a small one, living among humans without chains. When Cole told her, she didn't speak at first. She sat on the edge of the bed, the scarf still wrapped around her neck, her golden eyes fixed on the floor. When? She asked quietly. Tomorrow, Cole said. The silence that followed felt heavy. She didn't argue, didn't ask why. But he could see it in the way her hands gripped the blanket. She didn't want to go. That evening, they ate together. In the mess hall, the room was quieter than usual. A few soldiers glanced at them. Knowing what was coming, Areshka didn't touch her food much. She sat and thought, her gaze moving between the cup in front of her and Cole's face. Afterward, Cole walked her back to her room. At the door, she stopped and turned to him. You found me in the dust, she said slowly, I thought. You wanted something, that is how it always was. But you gave. And took nothing. She paused, her voice catching for the first time since he had known her. You changed. What I thought humans were. He didn't know what to say, but... She stepped closer. Her hand was small and cold as she took his in both of hers. She looked up at him, her eyes unsteady but determined. I am a warrior, she said, but when you touched me with kindness, I learned something greater. For a moment, the room felt too small, too quiet. Cole realized his heart was pounding harder than it had in any battle. He gave her hand a light squeeze. You don't have to go, he said, surprising himself. She blinked. You can stop it. He thought of the chain of command, of the signatures and protocols, of how many people above him would say no. But then he thought of the first day of finding her trembling in the dust, of her pushing food away, of her standing in the mess hall to defend him, and he knew his answer. I'll find a way, he said, the next morning. When the transport crew came to collect her, Cole met them at the landing pad. His voice was calm, but his stance left no room for argument. She stays, he told them. The officer in charge frowned. Orders say Cole cut him off. Then the orders are wrong. It took nearly an hour of heated calls and quiet threats, but when the dust settled, the transport left without her. She stood a few steps away during it all, silent, watching when it was over. Cole walked back toward her. You're not going anywhere, he said. She didn't speak, just stepped forward and placed her hand lightly against his chest. Right over his heartbeat, she stayed like that for a few seconds before lowering her hand. Then I fight here, she said simply. From that day forward, Areshka moved through the outpost like she belonged there. She trained with the soldiers, joined them at meals, even offered advice during drills. She still kept the scarf, still kept the small wooden soldier on her table. But the guarded look in her eyes was gone. Weeks later, during a quiet evening, Cole found her in the training yard. She was sitting on one of the benches, polishing her blade. When she saw him, she stood, walked over, and without a word, took his hand again. It wasn't trembling this time. Her grip was steady. Sure, you gave me more than food, she said softly. You gave me a place. Cole felt the corners of his mouth turn upward. And you gave me A reminder, he said, that kindness can be stronger than fear. They stood there for a moment, no words, just the quiet hum of the night around them. And Cole knew this was no longer about a rescue, no longer about human and alien. It was about two warriors, one who had been broken, one who refused to leave her behind, and how a single touch in the dust had changed both of their lives forever.